long before the cries of democracy echoed through Kenya's valleys, the wind whispered the name of a boy born beside a mighty lake. The year was 1945, a time when the soil of Africa was restless, when the chains of empire were breaking, and when destiny chose a child named Raila Amollo Odinga. He was not born to ease or comfort. He was born to fire, to a family of warriors and dreamers. His father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, had stood at the cradle of the new Kenya, demanding that freedom mean more than a flag. From that lineage, Raila inherited not just a name, but a burden: to fight for a nation still learning to walk, and to speak truth even when it burned. In the years that followed, this child of the lake would grow into a man who stood at the edge of storms. Jailed, exiled, betrayed, yet never broken. His story is not merely of politics, it is the legend of endurance, of belief carried through prison bars and across generations. This is the saga of Raila Odinga, the man they came to call Baba, the eternal opposition, the iron heart of Kenya's long walk to justice. In the village of Maseno, the boy Raila grew under the vast western skies, a thinker's child with a rebel's spirit. He walked barefoot through dust and dawn, listening to elders speak of the old ways and the new Kenya yet to come. When time came for learning, he ventured far, crossing seas and tongues. In East Germany, amid snow and steel, he studied mechanical engineering, a young African mind absorbing the discipline of machines and the doctrine of revolution. He learned that systems like nations could be built and rebuilt, if one dared to change their foundations. When he returned home, the country was under a tightening fist. President Daniel Arap Moi ruled with eyes that saw dissent as treason. Yet Raila, inheritor of a father's courage, would not bow to silence. He began to speak, softly at first, then with thunder. His voice carried the echoes of the lakeside and the sharpness of truth. Kenya, he believed, could not be whole while fear ruled its heart. Then came 1982, the year of shadows. A coup attempt shook Kenya, and the regime sought vengeance. In the sweep of fear, Raila's name was marked. Soldiers came in the night. He was taken, accused, and thrown into Kamiti maximum prison, without trial, without mercy. What followed would have broken lesser souls. For 6 years, the light of day became a memory, the sound of chains, a lullaby. They sought to break his will through solitude and silence. But within the darkness, he turned pain into purpose. They took his freedom, but not his fire. They tried to bury him, but they forgot he was a seed. When he emerged, his body was thinner, but his spirit was vast as the sky. He spoke of justice not as an idea, but as a covenant, one written in suffering. And though the regime threw him back into prison more than once, his name had already escaped beyond the walls. From Kamiti to the world, the name Raila became a whisper of defiance, a promise that tyranny would one day meet its reckoning. After his release, danger still hunted him. In 1991, when assassins and state agents prowled, Raila fled into exile in Norway. There, far from home, he watched his country bleed under one-party rule. Yet even in exile, he gathered strength, building alliances, raising Kenya's story before the world. When the wind shifted and multi-party democracy was restored, he returned, not as a fugitive, but as a warrior coming home. Crowds filled the streets, songs filled the air. The struggle was no longer underground. It was a movement. He entered parliament, representing Langata, where the poor and the hopeful saw in him not a politician, but a champion. From those early campaigns, he spoke of reform, equality, and the dream of a Kenya where power served the people. Thus began a new battle, not against bars of iron, but against the invisible chains of corruption and inequality. The 1990s roared with tension and transformation. In 1997, Raila stood for the presidency for the first time. He lost Oskaiba, but his loss was a beginning. The people had seen a man unafraid to challenge kings. Then came 2005. Kenya's leaders sought to pass a new constitution that, in truth, protected old powers. Raila opposed it, rallying under the banner of the orange, the symbol of no. The orange wave swept through villages and cities alike, uniting Kenyans across tribes and classes. When the government's draft was defeated, the orange became more than a color. It became a movement, the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM. Raila, its torchbearer, had become the voice of reform, the face of resistance. He was no longer just a son of Jaramogi. He was the people's general. The streets began to chant, not in whispers, but in thunder, "Baba! Baba! Baba!" Then came the year that tore the nation's heart. 2007, a year of hope turned to horror. Raila, leading the ODM, challenged President Mwai Kibaki. The people waited with bated breath as votes were counted and counted again. Then, chaos. The results were declared, the incumbent sworn in, and the sky itself seemed to shatter. Kenya burned. Brothers turned against brothers. Cities smoldered. More than 1,000 lives were lost and hundreds of thousands fled their homes. Raila stood before the storm, neither fleeing nor yielding. His cry was not vengeance, but justice. "This nation must live," he said. "If it must heal through fire, then let that fire purify, not consume." Out of that darkness came mediation, led by Kofi Annan and a fragile peace, the Grand Coalition government. Raila became prime minister, sharing power with Kibaki. It was an uneasy truce, yet from it came something monumental and the rebirth of Kenya's soul. From the corridors of the Grand Coalition, Raila pushed for a covenant of renewal. The ghost of 2007 demanded change, and change he delivered through one of Kenya's greatest victories, the Constitution of 2010. It was more than paper. It was the script of a nation's rebirth. Power devolved to counties. The presidency trimmed of imperial might. Rights and justice written not as favors but as guarantees. Raila's fingerprints were on every line of that charter. And though history rarely grants credit to one man, those who were there remember. He was the driving force, the relentless engine behind Kenya's new dawn. It was his greatest victory, yet not his final one. For even as the ink dried, the hunger for the presidency, not for glory, but for fulfillment of destiny, still burned within him. In 2013, Raila stood again. The battlefield had changed. The players were younger, alliances stranger. He faced Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, scions of a new order. The vote was close, the nation tense. He lost again. Many urged him to rest, but heroes of destiny do not rest, they rise. In 2017, he returned older but unbowed. Once more, the people gathered in millions. Once more, he spoke of justice, of fairness, of the dream deferred. The election ended in turmoil, but this time, the Supreme Court itself rose to match his courage. For the first time in African history, a presidential election was nullified. It was a triumph of law over fear, a victory Raila had fought decades to make possible. Yet, in the rerun, he withdrew, boycotting a contest he deemed unfree. What followed was the moment of myth. The people's president swearing in at Uhuru Park. There, before tens of thousands, he stood hand on Bible and declared not rebellion but reclamation, a symbolic act for those who believed their voice still mattered. It was both audacity and poetry, defiance and faith. In 2018, something no prophet foresaw happened. Raila Odinga, the eternal rival, walked into a meeting with President Uhuru Kenyatta and walked out hand in hand. The handshake stunned the nation. Some called it betrayal, others called it genius. But to Raila, it was necessity. Peace was the higher victory. Together they birthed the Building Bridges Initiative, BBI, a grand vision of unity, inclusion, and healing. It sought to expand the table of leadership, to end the winner-takes-all curse that had haunted Kenya since independence. Though courts would later strike it down, the spirit of BBI lived on. A reminder that Raila's fight was never merely about elections, but about rewriting Kenya's destiny. The handshake also altered his image. The rebel had become a reconciler, the fighter now a statesman. And yet, the fire of ambition still glowed, waiting for one last battle. 2022. Raila's fifth and perhaps final march to the mountain. Supported by President Kenyatta and an alliance of new and old, he faced Deputy President William Ruto in a duel that split history itself. The campaign was epic, a contest not just of policies but of philosophies. Raila spoke of justice, of integrity, of lifting the downtrodden. The crowd still sang his name. But when the dust settled, fate denied him again. He contested, he petitioned, and when the Supreme Court upheld the results, he bowed, not in defeat but in dignity. For even in loss, he reminded the nation that democracy is larger than any man. Raila Odinga had once said, "A nation is not built in one lifetime." And in that moment, he became what legends become, a man who transcends his own victories. Some measure greatness by the crowns one wears, others by the storms one survives. Raila Odinga wore no crown, but he stood through tempests that would have swallowed others whole. He faced imprisonment, betrayal, exile, defeat. Yet each time, he rose. He built parties, destroyed dynasties, forged unity where hatred festered. His was the long obedience in the same direction. Not the easy heroism of victory, but the hard heroism of persistence. He was called stubborn, yes, but also steadfast. He was mocked as a perennial loser, yet every loss pulled the nation closer to democracy. And so his story became something rarer than a presidency. It became legend. For legends are not crowned. They are carved into the conscience of nations. Raila's greatest monument is not made of marble but of memory. It lives in the 2010 Constitution, in the courage of protesters who march knowing they have rights, in the words "we, the people," which now carry weight. His struggle planted in Kenya's soil a seed that cannot die, the belief that power must answer to the governed. In the streets of Kibera, in the markets of Kisumu, in the minds of young Kenyans who chant "no justice, no peace," his spirit lingers, not as bitterness but as a challenge. He did not need to sit in State House to rule hearts, for what he built was something far greater, a culture of resistance, a faith in reform, a language of courage. And now, when the sun sets over Lake Victoria, the fishermen still speak of him, the boy who became the conscience of a country. They say when storms rise and thunder rolls, it is the spirit of Raila refusing to be silenced. He was the prisoner who taught Kenya to dream, the reformer who made law bow to justice, the rival who made peace with foes, the elder who taught that leadership is service, not entitlement. He may never have worn the presidential sash, but he wore something heavier. The expectations of millions, the grief of a nation, and the unyielding hope that tomorrow could be better. For in the end, the truest leaders are not those who sit upon thrones, but those who lift nations upon their shoulders. And so the legend endures, not in office, but in the heartbeat of Kenya itself. When history calls the roll of heroes among the names written in unblinking, comment below what you will miss most about Baba, and share your flowers for his memory. Let's celebrate a life that moved a nation.